şeyler.
Evet.
Tamamen yanlış hesaplar ve umutsuzluk sonucu olabiliyor böyle şeyler.
Anlıyorum.
Kalıcı olamayacağını, herhangi bir elde edemeyeceğini düşünüyorum.
Peki. Sayın Halil Bektay, katıldınız.
Teşekkür ederim.
İyi akşamlar diliyorum efendim.
İyi akşamlar.
Stüdyomda Fadime... Kim efendim? Bir saniye, Fadime Özkan'ı ben stüdyomda tanıtacaktım ama şimdi Melik Yiğitel Melik Yiğitel telefon attığımızda. Evet, Melik Yiğitel, Ankara'dan son gelişmeleri almak istiyorum senden.
Evet, Ardan Zentürk, akşam saatlerinde başladı hareketlilik. Ankara'nın üzerinde F-16 savaş uçakları yarım saat süreyle alçak uçuş yaptı. Aslında ilk etapta acaba bir terör saldırısına karşı bir önlem olarak böyle bir şey mi yapılıyor diye düşünüldü, ama sonradan Genelkurmay'dan da bir takım hareketlilik olduğu ve hatta silah sesleri geldiğine dair bilgiler geldi elimize ve en sonda durum netleşti. Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri içinde bir grup, ama tamamen hiyerarşik yapının dışında bir grup darbe yapmaya kalkıştığı anlaşıldı. Tekrar ediyorum, tarihi anlamda da kayıtlara geçsin diye 21. yapının dışında bir demokrasi, özgürlük ve özgürlüğün, demokrasinin daha da yükseltilmesinin konuşulduğu bir dönemde askeri darbe yapma amacıyla bir grubun yönetime el koymaya çalıştığı bilgisi çok net. Ama Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri'nin hiyerarşik yapısı içinde değil bu. Ankara'da da bir takım yollar kapatıldı. Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi'nin etrafında bir takım askeri devriyeler geziyor. Böyle bir çağda yönetime el konulmaya çalışılıyor. Sonra da içeriden Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri adına bir açıklama yapıldı. Yönetime el konuldu diye, anayasal düzeni korumak adına. Ama tekrar etmek gerekirse hiyerarşik bir yapı yok. Bir grubun içeriden bu çağda darbe yapmaya kalkıştığının altını çizmek gerekir. İçeride ve dışarıda bunların bağlaşıkları kimlerle işbirliği yapıyorlar ve bu iş bu noktaya nasıl geldi? Adalet Bakanı Bekir Bozdağ bu anlamda da savcıların hemen harekete geçtiğini söyledi. Ve akşam saatlerinde yaşanan hareketlilik an itibariyle devam ediyor. Hem Genelkurmay'da bir hareketlilik hem Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi'nde bir hareketlilik var. Tekrar altını çizmek istiyorum. Tarihi anlamda kayıtlara geçsin diye söylüyorum. Böyle bir çağda Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri'nin içinde bir grup halkın seçtiği bir iktidarı devirmeye kalkıştı, darbe yapmaya kalkıştı.
Peki Melik, bu grubun bu kalkışmasından sonra Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri'nin o bildiğimiz disiplinli hiyerarşik yapısı nasıl bir reaksiyon göstermeye hazırlanıyor? Ne yapacaklar? Bu konuda bilgiler var mı?
Şimdi içeride Türk Silahlı Kuvvetleri'nin içinde bir grubun bu darbe girişimine direndiği çok açık. O yüzden hiyerarşik bir yapı değil açıklamasını yaptı hem Bekir Bozdağ hem de Başbakan Binali Yıldırım. Şimdi o grup bu noktaya nasıl geldi? O hazırlıkları hangi aşamada yaptı? Tabii ki hiyerarşik bir yapının dışında çok gizli bir yol ve yöntemle yapıldığı çok açık. Evet. Fakat hani başarılı olma şansları böyle bir çağda eğer olursa zaten bu toplamda Türkiye'nin büyük utancı olur ve tarihe de karanlık harflerle girer. Çünkü bu girişim, bu darbe girişimi toplamda demokrasiye ve toplamda hepimize yapılmış bir girişim. Bütün herkesin iradesinin ipotek altına alındığı bir dönem. Bu sadece mesele AK Parti hükümeti meselesi değil. Evet. Toplamda siyaset rehine alınmaya çalışılıyor. O yüzden de artık siyaset bu noktadan sonra herkes demokrasinin, özgürlüğün ve kendi demokratik anlayışının namusuna, şerefine sahip çıkmak zorunda. Çünkü mesele sadece burada AK Parti, mesele Recep Tayyip Erdoğan meselesi değil. Toplamda Türk siyasetin hepsi rehin almak isteniyor. Adı üstünde darbe diyoruz.
Peki diğer partilerden şu ana kadar herhangi bir açıklama ben stüdyoda olduğum için duyamadım ama siz Ankara'da
yok
MHP,
çünkü.
CHP, ve diğerlerinde durum nasıl?
Şu ana kadar hiçbir açıklama yok.
Evet.
Hiçbir şekilde bir yere de hani diyelim ki hani bu saatte bir açıklama geçemiyorsa bile en azından bir yere bağlanıp bunu Türk demokrasisini rehin alma meselesidir diyebilirlerdi. Şu ana kadar bunlardan hiçbiri olmadı. O yüzden ısrarla onun altını çiziyorum. Yani mesele AK Parti meselesi değil, mesele toplamda siyasetin kendine sahip çıkması meselesidir. Kendi iradesini rehin vermeme meselesidir. Ama şu ana kadar bir tepki yok. İnşallah olur. Çünkü bu toplamda Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nde yaşayan her bireyi doğrudan ilgilendiren ve her bireyin iradesine, özgürlüğüne, demokratik anlayışına bir darbedir. Çok açık. Yani bunun hiç önünde arkasına ama fakat lakin koyduğunuz anda sınıfta kalırsınız.
Peki Melik Yiğiter, birazdan yine gelen bilgiler olduğu takdirde sana tekrar seninle bağlanacağız. Ben bu arada tekrar hoş geldin diyeyim Fadime Özkan'a, Star Gazetesi yazarı.
Hoş bulduk. Ya biz de Kadınlar Meclisi yayınındaydık aslında. Son dakikalarına denk geldi bu junta girişimi. Ve ben de burada kalmak istedim sizinle birlikte.
Teşekkür ederim.
Şunu söylemek gerekiyor. Türkiye halkı şunu bilmeli. Türkiye büyük bir devlet.
Evet.
Ve daha önce darbenin ve vesayetin geçerli olduğu, halkın milli iradenin sözünün geçmediği dönemlerde bu tür darbe girişimleri oldu, darbeler oldu.
Çok
ama
oldu.
Türkiye,
benim çocukluğumdan bu yana gördüğüm
ama
darbe sayısı
darbe
5.
dönemi bitti. Darbe kim olursa olsun, yani TSK içinde bir junta girişimi olabilir.
Evet.
Ya da işte Sayın Bakan da, Başbakan da açıkladı ki bu bir aslında junta faaliyeti. Yani bu emir komuta zinciri içinde olan bir girişim değil. TSK ve emniyet bütün gücüyle devletin güvenlik güçleri bu kalkışan grubu bertaraf etmek üzere şu anda elbette görevini yapıyor. Yani herkes sakin olsun. Türkiye büyük bir devlet. Bu konular konusunda da çok şerbetliyiz ve dirayetli bir toplumuz. Rahat olmak lazım ve provokasyona itibar etmemek lazım. Güvenlik güçlerine yardımcı olmak. Herkes evinde sakince bu sürecin neticelenmesini beklemek lazım. Ama hani şunu da net olarak söyleyelim. Türkiye bir demokrasi ülkesi. Türkiye'de asker hiyerarşik olarak da kendi konumları, kademeleri bakımından da her şekilde sivil iktidara bağlıdır. Ve sivil iktidarı bu ülkede toplum belirler. Düzenli, güvenli seçimler olur ve toplum kim istiyorsa Cumhurbaşkanı olarak, Başbakan, hükümet olarak
şu
onu
anda
belirler
iktidarda %50 oy almış bir parti var.
Elbette yani şu anda Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi'ndeki temsiliyet Türkiye Cumhuriyet tarihi boyunca en yüksek temsiliyet. Yani halkın iradesi bizatihi devletin kurumlarında zaten bu ülkeyi yönetiyor. Böyle bir durumda bu kadar net toplumun, halkın kararını verdiği ve iradesini devlet yönetimine yansıttığı bir dönemde birkaç çapulcunun ya da birkaç paralel artığının herhangi bir can sıkıntısı ya da bir can havliyle yönetime el koymak ya da ülkede huzuru bozmak gibi girişimine pabuç bırakacak halimiz yok. Biz bu ülkeyi sokakta bulmadık. Bu ülkenin üstelik en sıkıntılı bir dönemi. Bir yanında büyük bir savaş var. Terör örgütleri ülkeye saldırıyorlar. Böyle bir dönemde bu ülkenin askeri, polisi zaten canı pahasına bir... Bu paralel yapının ve işbirlikçileri her kim ise bunların yaptığı şey ihanetin açık, aşikar görünür bir halidir. Yani şimdiye kadar paralel yapı yok. Bu işte AK Parti hükümetinin bu Erdoğan'ın uydurması diyen siyasi partiler, sivil aktörler yer yarılsın, yerin içine girsin. Yani para ve ihanetin en büyüğünü bugün biz görüyoruz. Ama işte bir avuç tur bunlar muhtemelen ve Temmuz'un ortasındayız. Ağustos'ta yaş toplantıları var ve bu sene içerisinde paralelle mücadele hem devlet güvenlik belgesine girdi hem de bütün güvenlik kurulu toplantılarında ve devletin Cumhuriyet savcılarında ifade ettiği gibi bir terör örgütü statüsünde Türkiye zaten FETÖ'yle mücadele ediyor. Dolayısıyla yaşta ayıklanacaklarını anlayan muhtemelen bir avuç komuta kademesindeki paralel.
Evet.
Ve işte ne kadar varsa içerisinde bunların bir can havliyle girişimi olma ihtimali var. Ama kendilerini ifşa etmeleri de aslında bir anlamda Türkiye'nin işini kolaylaştırdı. Tek tek ayıklamak yerine kimse burada kalkışan alınsınlar ve
Zaten
ceza hukukuna
ismen
göre
bazı askerler için gözaltı
en ağır
kararları alınmış
şekilde de
savcılar tarafından.
cezalandırılsınlar.
Evet.
Böyle bir şeyi tevessül etmek Türkiye'ye ihanettir ve bunun cezasının en ağır şekilde verilmesi gerekir. Ve tabii şunu da bu gasp, çünkü Türkiye'de bir milli irade olduğu bir dönemde yapılıyor olması ihanetin en büyüğü ve en aşikar hali.
Korkunç bir şey. Evet.
İşte hem terör örgütleri hem Suriye'deki bu sıkışılmış durum, Türkiye'yi zorlayan durumu da bir fırsat bildikleri anlaşılıyor.
Evet.
Ama Türkiye büyük bir devlet.
Yalnız tabii
Ordusuyla,
burada hepimizin
siyasetiyle,
büyük bir üzüntüye
kurumlarıyla.
sevk eden, şu anda büyük bir olasılıkla ben tabii bir saate yakındır
Evet.
ekrandayım, stüdyodayım ama dışarıda ne oluyor bilmiyorum. Yani dışarıda derken sınırlarımızın dışında.
Evet.
Şu anda bütün manşetlerinde, dünya manşetlerinde Türkiye ve darbe girişimi
Evet.
kelimelerinin yan yana yer aldığını buradan görebiliriz.
Evet.
Ve bu 21. yüzyılda gerçekten bir toplum açısından çok ciddi bir problem. Yani bu demokratik... Peki, sen ne olur burada dur biraz Fadime Özkan. Ben bir Kayahan Uygur'un da görüşlerini alayım. Sayın Kayahan Uygur, sizi dinliyoruz efendim. Ne düşünüyorsunuz gelişmeler hakkında?
Efendim, bu bir kamikaze hareketidir. Bir takım unsurlar tarafından düzenlenmiştir ve başarı şansı yoktur. Birkaç saat içinde her şey normal şekline dönecek. Onda kimsenin endişe etmesine, üzülmesine gerek yoktur. Türkiye'nin rejimi sağlamdır ve bu konuda endişe edilmesin. İnsanlarımız rahat olsunlar. Demokrasi her halükarda Türkiye'de çok güçlüdür. Böyle ufak
military has taken over, and quoting local media as saying that government leaders have been taken into custody. So even as the Turkish prime minister makes those reassuring statements about whatever this is being over, other statements from other sources suggest this is at least a difference of opinion, or this is still very much underway. Christian, how quickly do you think we're going to find out what in fact has happened?
Probably pretty quickly. If the military is saying that, that is quite a departure from the statements we've been hearing before. Again, we have to wait and see, because clearly there is a battle for public opinion and there's a battle for control, certainly over the airwaves. As you know, the military in Turkey is secular, and there have been complaints over the years of an increasing Islamization by the ruling AKP party. That may be part of it, or we simply don't know. At this point, it is way too early to tell. But if indeed this is what it is claimed to be, Turkish military, it would represent a very, very serious departure politics. If you remember, before Recep Tayyip Erdogan was prime minister in the early 2000s, and now, of course, he's president, there was a series of military coups and takeovers in Turkey. And when when Erdogan came to power, he brought democracy. He basically curbed a lot of the extrajudicial powers of the military. He essentially put the military back in their barracks, where under a democracy he believed they belong, and not in power. But Turkey is no stranger to military coups. It would be an amazing and important departure if that were to happen now, after all these years of Erdogan's rule. But there are...
How quickly would you expect to hear from Erdogan himself at a time like this? I'm stumped, because this seems like a time when his country and the world would be expecting he'd have something to say.
Well, Jonathan, you're absolutely right. We hear reports that he's been on vacation, but we simply do not know. And so it's incredibly hard to speculate. But we're just going to have to wait to see how this plays out and how the reports keep filtering in from Ankara, from Istanbul. I'm just, flashing back to 1991, when you remember a group tried to create a coup in the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev was out of Moscow and was brought back, and there was, a battle then in the streets of Moscow to reestablish democracy. This is obviously a very, very fragile time, and at that time, if you remember, that's when Boris Yeltsin came to the fore and stood on that tank in the middle of Moscow and said, "This will not stand," and they were able to pass through that crisis at that particular time. This is, very, very difficult situation. Turkey, under President Erdogan, has established a very strong democracy. However, in the recent years, we've all been reporting, many have been reporting, on the increasing authoritarianism of the Erdogan rule. And we simply don't know what's going on. And just in the last couple of months, Erdogan dismissed his longtime prime minister, Davutoglu, and now there's a new prime minister, and, words were made public from his office, but we wait to see whether indeed government officials are at liberty to speak or whether they're not, and what actually is going on in Turkey right now.
Christian Amirpour, our chief international correspondent. Let me just bring our viewers up to date on details as we have them. And frankly, we're not sure exactly what is going on in Turkey right now. But the Turkish armed forces have said that they have taken power in the country. The Reuters news agency says, in fact, that they've done it, they say, to protect the democratic order and maintain human rights. In a statement sent by email and reported on Turkish television, the military said all of Turkey's existing foreign relations would be maintained and the rule of law would remain the priority. Crucial in all of this is an enormous question. Have they, in fact, succeeded? The Turkish prime minister said that the unauthorized military operation, what he at one point called an attempted coup, had failed and it had been put down. And the president, Tayyip Erdogan, has not been heard from or seen. He was said to have been on vacation. The military action that we have known of has been centered on the country's capital, Ankara, and its largest city, Istanbul. He was elsewhere, and his whereabouts have not been described. No word on him, no word on his safety. We've been looking at the first pictures we've been getting in. I'm told we were looking just moments ago at pictures of the airport. The situation in the cities is crucial, of course. It is not clear that the civilians have in any way been affected, except for this, the closure of two enormous bridges over the Bosporus. One of the first things that was reported, one of the first indications that things on a Friday night in Istanbul were not going the way they normally would be expected to. Now we can see traffic is moving. It may well be that that bridge is open, but I can see lights in the distance, so maybe we're just seeing people returning and still not able to get across the Bosporus. But the reports really amounted to a number of unsettling details about events. Gunfire was heard in some places. Military jets were said to be making low passes for more than an hour. And the government ultimately announced that there was something underway. Let me ask you, Christian, we do not know if Tayyip Erdogan is still in power, but what would we expect from a man like this if, in fact, some significant section of the military has turned against him?
Well, again, Jonathan, it's just too difficult to speculate. Obviously, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has ruled unchallenged for all these years. He has, at the beginning of his rule, was widely praised for bringing democracy to Turkey, for demilitarizing Turkey, for getting away from the countless political cycles of coup and counter-coup and military takeovers. And this was going on for a long, long time. He put the military back into their barracks. In other words, made them a professional military rather than a governing body. And this potentially upset some. But on the other hand, for a long time, the rule in Turkey was getting more and more democratic. Then, over the last several years, there has been a huge amount of criticism that this president, at the time prime minister, now president, was getting more and more autocratic. As you know, he had wanted to change Turkey's constitution recently. Now, many criticized him for that, saying that he wanted to make it a purely presidential system just to bolster his own personal power. Others said, no, what he really wants to do is make it more like the United States, for instance, make it a presidential system and finally get away from the kind of fragile democracy that allows itself to be, or susceptible to coups and that kind of instability. I will say that right now I am recalling what happened in Egypt in the last several years. If you remember, after the Arab Spring, Mohamed Morsi, the first elected president of Egypt after the Arab Spring, became, president of the country, the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood president. And after a short time, perhaps a year or so, the military took over. Now, they refused to allow their action to have been called a coup. It created all sorts of diplomatic brouhaha when people criticized the Egyptian military for getting rid of Mohamed Morsi, and he's still in jail. But that is what they did. They went in and they took over because they thought that Mohamed Morsi was simply promoting an undemocratic Islamist agenda. So there is precedent in this region for this kind of thing. But if it were to happen in Turkey right now, which has been a democracy for a long, long time, despite the failings and despite the shortcomings and despite the human rights violations, the crackdown on the press, and the many things that we've all been reporting on from Turkey, it has been, by and large, a democracy that its allies will want to maintain. Turkey is a very vital member of the international community. It's obviously an ally. And for better or for worse, it's on the border with Syria, and for better or for worse, has been part of the West's attempt to somehow minimize the fallout from Syria. And that has been very, very difficult for Turkey. They've taken in more than, I believe, 3 million or so refugees from the Syria war, and it's destabilized their country very, very severely. And you've seen over the last certainly over the last year, a massive spike in terrorism in Turkey, some 14 acts of terrorism over the last year, culminating in what happened in Istanbul a week to 10 days when it's presumed that the terrorists, ISIS terrorists, came across from Raqqa in Syria using the sort of Turkish pipeline in and out of Syria to create havoc at the Istanbul airport. I mean, this is a lot of the context, but, I think knowing the history and the politics of that region, I think that the military just did not like seeing what they believe to be a increasingly Islamist and autocratic president seeking to change the constitution. Again, at this time, we're speculating. I'm just giving you the context until we know for sure what is going on.
CNN's chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour. And once again, if you're just joining us, a confused time in Turkey. Two different power centers say they are now in control of that country. The Turkish military releasing a statement by email and reported on Turkish television saying that it has taken control of the country to protect its democratic order and maintain human rights. At the same time, the civilian government that answers to President Tayyip Erdogan is saying that it is in control and is putting down this unauthorized military operation, which it has hesitated to call, but has called a coup attempt. Tayyip Erdogan himself is nowhere to be seen, and his whereabouts are one of the questions we're asking at this hour. Jake Tapper is following the story and joins us now with what he's been able to learn. What can you tell us?
The military are on the streets of major Turkish cities. The headquarters reports that the water board authority in Istanbul had that there were tanks outside there. If there is a military, the Turkish military has conducted 3 coups in the past 30 years. Since 1960, I've lived through some of them. When they do this, they're very serious. It's not just some soldier with a rifle. It's something that's well thought out and well planned.
Do we know where Erdogan is right now?
Well, apparently he's on holiday, some holiday in Bodrum on the Aegean coast in Turkey.
That's interesting timing. The State Department is just tweeted, quote, confirming media reports of gunshots and possible attempted uprising in Turkey. Remain vigilant, a warning to any Americans traveling in that country. Barbara, question right now about, obviously, we've spent a lot of our coverage in the last day, week, month, year, 2 years, 3 years, talking about ISIS. Obviously, Turkey is a critical ally for the West in the battle against ISIS, shares a border with Syria. There was that horrific ISIS attack just a few weeks ago at the Istanbul airport. What might an attempted coup, if the military does in fact succeed, if they have not already, in taking over the country, what might that mean for the war against ISIS?
Well, first of all, you have to believe that ISIS is watching all of this tonight unfold. ISIS likes instability. It gives them an opportunity, heaven forbid, to move in and launch more attacks. That is going to be a big concern. If there is a coup and the military takes over the government in Turkey, the U.S. military cannot stay. They cannot be seen to be supporting a coup. The U.S. military does not operate in countries where other militaries take over by force. It raises fundamental questions about whether the U.S. can maintain its access to Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey and continue to fly missions against ISIS. It raises fundamental questions about the effort to get the Turks to crack down on the Turkish-Syrian border so ISIS doesn't cross the border and come into Turkey and then move up into Europe. The U.S. military is in a very extraordinary position tonight. They need Turkey. They need access to those bases. But if there is a coup, the U.S. military would most likely really have to pack and go. You cannot have the U.S. military out there supporting a military coup in another country. Jake?
Although the Egypt precedent certainly complicates those general rules.
That's a really good point. You know, absolutely. Are there exceptions? You bet there are exceptions, and they have happened in the past. But you're going to have to make a public case. You're going to have to make a case to NATO. Because Turkey is a NATO country, maybe everybody will just turn an eye to this and say, well, we have to continue because of ISIS, because of the security relationship. But traditionally, it becomes very dicey, as I say, for the U.S. military to be in a country conducting military operations. The U.S. wasn't conducting military operations in Egypt, of course, but conducting military operations in Turkey when the government, the democratically elected government, is taken over by military force. Jake?
I want to bring in CNN Chief International Correspondent Christiane Amanpour, who joins us right now on the phone. Christiane, what can you tell us? You've certainly spent a lot of time in this part of the world.
Well, indeed, and just to the point of a potential coup in Turkey, you know, this is obviously not the first time. I mean, Turkish modern history is replete with military coups. And one of the things that President Erdogan did was try, when he came into power in the early 2000s as prime minister, to get the military out of politics and to get them back into their barracks. And that didn't sit well with a lot of the military. And of course, it hasn't sat well with the military and indeed many members of the secular Turkish society, as Erdogan is perceived to have become much more Islamist and much more authoritarian. And this has been a trend in Prime Minister and now President Erdogan's rules, particularly after he's been elected several times, elected and re-elected. And as he tries to, you know, concentrate more and more power in his hands and in now the presidential office, that has become something that many people, not just in Turkey, but around the world, particularly in the West and his allies, have grown to sort of be very suspicious of. And you were talking about the precedent. There is a precedent because what we saw happen in Egypt after the Arab Spring, Mohamed Morsi was elected. Eventually, the military decided that they just didn't want any more of this, that he was being too Islamist. They thought it was destabilizing. They hate the idea or calling it a coup, and they get very internationally, diplomatically irate when you call it a coup, but they took over from the Muslim Brothers. did to that part of the world until it was deemed that he had gone way too far and become way too authoritarian. So we're waiting to see. And I mean, let's not forget, 14 terrorist attacks in Turkey over this past year. The latest one, as we all know, was in Istanbul. And the first time we saw a real direct back and forth link between ISIS in Syria using the sort of Turkish pipeline to come back and create mayhem at the Istanbul airport.
A great deal about Turkey and also about the precedent of the Egyptian coup, or coups, I suppose. Right. It does sound as though, based on precedent and based on what we're hearing from the Turkish military, that this would be very different from the Egyptian military pulling a coup, that this is an attempt to bring more democracy and more human rights to the country. At least that's what they're claiming.
Well, right, Jake. That would certainly have to be the argument they'd make. And the previous discussion before Christian about whether we would have to leave or not, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that we would feel the absolute compunction or requirement because, of course, ISIS is a mortal threat. And the military in Turkey is also going to argue that Erdogan made the ISIS problem worse because for a long time he was supporting factions in Syria that were very hardline, perhaps not ISIS itself, but extremist fundamentalist groups because he was so adamant about overthrowing President Assad of Syria. And therefore, ultimately, what he did was get friendly with groups that later turned on their master, like Frankenstein, if you will. And so in that regard, the military is going to say that Turkey's own internal security had been put at risk by a man who was also subverting Turkish democracy.
All right.
The Prime Minister of the NATO ally, Turkey, says military units have launched an uprising. Gunfire is reported in the capital. Bridges are blocked, and low-flying aircraft have been spotted. Terror investigation. Police combed through the apartment of the attacker who drove a truck through a holiday crowd in France, mowing down hundreds of people. What are they learning about him? Did he have any ties to terrorist groups? Mile of horror. A trail of carnage along the seafront promenade and night misgivings. Donald Trump picks Indiana Governor Mike Pence as his running mate, but CNN learns Trump had second thoughts and in a late-night call with advisors asked if he could change his mind. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. We're following several major breaking stories. The Prime Minister of Turkey, a NATO ally, says military units are attempting an uprising. There are tanks and troops in the streets. Bridges are blocked. Military aircraft have buzzed the capital. Reuters now says the Turkish military is claiming to have taken control. We have new information coming in right now. Stand by. Also, an urgent search for answers as France is staggered by another terror attack. This time, a slaughter along a seaside boulevard in Nice. The attacker plowed through a holiday crowd with a heavy truck, mowing down people for more than a mile before he was killed. 84 people are dead, including 10 children. More than 200 people were hurt. 52 remain in critical condition. Officials say the driver was a 31-year-old Tunisian in France for a decade. Police knew him as a petty criminal, but officials say he had no known ties to terrorist groups. A Texas man and his 11-year-old son are among the dead. 3 California college students were hurt, and 1 is missing. President Obama calls the attack appalling and sickening. The terror attack delayed and overshadowed Donald Trump's announcement of a running mate, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, a strong social conservative. After putting off a news conference for 24 hours, Trump tweeted today that he was pleased to have chosen Pence, but sources tell CNN's Dana Bash that Trump had second thoughts well into the night and was asking aides if he could change his mind. I'll speak with the House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mike McCall. He's standing by. And our correspondents, analysts, and guests, they will have full coverage of today's top stories. But let's begin with a stunning turn of events in a NATO ally. To our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, what are you hearing?
Well, really remarkable events still unfolding over the last several minutes, beginning just a little more than an hour ago. This is what we know now. We know that the Turkish military has now issued a statement, at least elements in the Turkish military has issued a statement saying that they have overthrown the government of President Erdogan. They say that they want friendly relations with the world and that they are doing this, in their words, in this statement, to restore democracy and human rights. We know that the Prime Minister of Turkey, before this statement, said that an attempted coup was underway, then drew back from using the term coup, called it a mutiny, said it is only parts or groups within the Turkish military that is attempting this, as opposed to the entire military as well. Here you have portion of that statement. This attempt will not be permitted. Those who attempted this will pay the heaviest price. An enormous show of military force in Istanbul, Turkey's largest city, but also in Ankara, the capital of Turkey. You're seeing tanks at the Istanbul airport where that terrorist attack was just a couple of weeks ago. The main bridge you're seeing there crossing the Bosphorus. Traffic has been blocked there. You're also seeing low-flying jets and helicopters over the major cities. When I say low-flying, I mean within feet of the ground, a remarkable show of force. As this is happening, you have that the president of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, has been on vacation, though in Turkey on the coast. We are told he's going to make a statement to the nation shortly. Wolf, you and I have talked about this before. The Turkish military has carried out coups before, in fact, 4 times since 1960. They view themselves historically as a guarantor to some degree of democracy in Turkey. They move in when they feel that the civilian government has gone beyond its bounds. And we know that there have been tense relations between the Turkish military at times with the Erdogan government on 2 points. One, on moving Turkey more in an Islamic direction. That is one thing. But also, two, what are seen by many in Turkey as anti-democratic moves by the government of Erdogan, imprisoning journalists, shutting down media organizations unfriendly to the government, often shutting down social media, as we're seeing happening there tonight. So you do have a lot of opposition here, but also a leader who has been elected a number of times as well. So
but it's
tense.
still very tense, but also very murky right now. Some elements of the military say they've taken over. Some elements of the government say that's not true.
No question. Here's the thing. You have a show of force going on right now, and there's an open question as to whether that show of force is all coming from one direction. Are they all forces disloyal to the government attempting this coup, or are some of them executing a show of force in support of the government? Extremely murky, as you say, Wolf.
I stand by. I want to go to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, who's following this as well. Barbara, this is a key NATO ally. The U.S. and other NATO allies, they have access to critically important military facilities in Turkey, including the Incirlik air base, where they launch a lot of airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. What are you hearing from your sources?
Tonight, Wolf, this is a crisis for the Pentagon and for NATO. Again, Turkey, a member of NATO. The U.S. for the last several months has been flying out of an airbase in southern Turkey, conducting airstrikes against ISIS in northern Syria and Iraq. They have been encouraging the Turkish military and security services to crack down on ISIS trying to cross the border from Syria into Turkey, from where ISIS operatives can then possibly move into Europe. The Turkish military and security services also control the Bosporus, the flow of maritime traffic in and out of the Black Sea and on into the Mediterranean. It just doesn't get more critical militarily than this. Now, if this is a full-fledged coup, if the Turkish military is in charge there now, it presents a dilemma for the Pentagon, for the Obama administration. The U.S. military does not deal with countries where there is a military coup. The whole message from the U.S. military is democratically elected governments. So what will happen now? Will the U.S. have to pack and go from Incirlik Air Base, or will they say in American-made warplanes, weapons, armor, tanks, all sorts of military gear to Turkey. It is in support of an elected Turkish government. So again, you have a situation tonight. All of this weaponry out there, the planes, the tanks, is it American-made? Is it being used potentially against the Turkish people? This becomes a huge problem. We don't have enough information yet, but what is so interesting here tonight at the Pentagon, officials here at the White House, the State Department, and NATO, now a couple of hours into this crisis, are still scrambling, first, to figure out what is happening, and second, to figure out what it all means. Wolf?
All right, Barbara, stand by. Jim Sciutto's working his sources. You're getting more information, Jim?
Couple updates just in the last couple of minutes. One, reports of soldiers inside Turkey's state broadcaster, another show of force there. We're also hearing from the U.S. State Department that social media has been shut down in Turkey, Twitter, Facebook, etc. The State Department also is confirming reports, in their words, of gunshots and what they call a possible attempted uprising. State Department confirming that to U.S. citizens. One final thing, Secretary of State John Kerry, he's in Moscow right now at a press conference just in the last several minutes, responding to a question about the situation in Turkey. He said he hopes, quote, there will be stability, peace, and continuity there.
This is the kind of situation where it's a national security crisis, if you will, from the U.S. perspective. Jim, people, I'm sure top national security officials are meeting right now, maybe over at the White House Situation Room and over at the Pentagon. Certainly they're having emergency meetings right now as well.
No question. With the first question being, and I've asked a lot of them, do they know what's going on? And they say it's still too early to tell. So they're trying to gather information. But just one more thing about Turkey. The U.S. has a lot of important allies. It's hard to think of a more important ally right now than Turkey in light of its proximity to Syria, its central part in the war against ISIS, some difficult relations there, but a very crucial ally to the U.S. now as well.
We got an expert on Turkey. Soner Shaptay is with us.
It started about a little bit over an hour ago with news of a military. This is a very hierarchical organization. It doesn't do anything bottom up. It does everything top down. So my sense is that this is a coup attempt. We don't know yet if the military has taken over, but there are signs that they are. Public-run government TV has just issued a statement in favor of the military. I've heard from my contacts in Turkey that there are tanks which have encircled the headquarters of the governing Justice and Development Party, AKP. There are tanks in the city's central square in Istanbul. There are tanks that have crossed the bridges between the European and Asian sides of the city. The airport has been shut down. So maybe it's an evolving coup. The government will respond to it. It looks like they won't step down.
And the biggest grievance the military has, or at least these elements of the military has against President Erdogan is what?
The biggest grievance is, I think, his number one, distortion of Turkish democracy. Number two, massive foreign policy failure, which has exposed Turkey to huge threats from ISIS next door to a Kurdish insurgency inside in Turkey and in Syria to confrontation with all regional countries from Russia to Egypt, and of course more recently ISIS threats, attacks, huge attacks inside Turkey that have killed over hundreds. Turkey has not seen this kind of stability in many decades, and I think that would be the biggest grievance the military would have aired out.
Our Soner, stand by. I want to go back to Barbara Starr over at the Pentagon. Barbara, the U.S. military watching very, very closely what's going on. Deep concern right now. This is a key NATO ally. Was there any indication that a coup could be in the works?
Well, I think for the last several weeks, there has been a lot of concern about the growing tensions inside Turkey, inside the Turkish government and with the military that folks are talking about now. But, you know, look at those pictures we're showing, Wolf. The big problem for the U.S. military tonight, as they look at those photos, they don't necessarily know, are those pro-government troops or are those coup troops? Whose weapons, whose tanks, whose aircraft are actually out on the street? This is a very significant issue. Is the democratically elected Turkish government, such as it is, going to be able to retain control? If we wake up tomorrow morning and the Turkish military is in control, this presents the challenge for the U.S. that we've been talking about. Just consider this. It was only a couple of weeks ago that the head of the U.S. Central Command made a very special trip to Turkey to talk to his military counterparts there about the fight against ISIS. And, you know, I guarantee you, ISIS is watching this video tonight, too. If they sense instability, this is what ISIS likes. This is what terrorists like. They move in when they sense there is not control. And it is always worth repeating. This is the summer season. Millions of tourists, Americans also there in Turkey tonight, Wolf.
It's an amazing development that's unfolding in Turkey right now. We're going to have a lot more on this. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Republican Congressman Mike McCall, is with us as well. And I know you're watching this very, very closely. What are you hearing? What's your analysis of this coup attempt that's underway inside this key NATO ally of Turkey?
Well, as you said, they're a key NATO ally. I've been over to Turkey many times, Istanbul, to the airport. We had that recent ISIS attack in Istanbul at the airport. And I think, the military and President Erdogan have had a tension over time. He's thrown the hierarchy out of the military. The military views themselves as more secular. I think President Erdogan more sort of Islamist. So I think that tension's always been there. But I think the ISIS attacks recently, along with the Russians being in that space, I think is driving, in my judgment, this military action. But be mindful, this is a NATO ally. We have an air base, Incirlik, there that conducts the airstrikes from Turkey into Iraq and Syria. We don't want this in any way to jeopardize those ongoing operations.
Because this is a very tense moment. And we've just been told that an announcer got on Turkish television just moments ago and announced, quote, a peace council has now taken over. It looks like the military, at least elements,
Syria. More recently, they realized that ISIS is not their ally and that they have blown back on the Turkish government and the Turkish people. And I think the military are responding to this.
As you know, there have been strains from time to time in the U.S.-Turkish relationship. U.S. officials have often, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, complained about President Erdogan, that he was too Islamist, if you will. He was taking steps that were anti-democracy along those lines. The irony right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, the military may be more pro-American than Erdogan, who's the democratically elected leader, the president of Turkey.
Well, that's the hope. If this has, in fact, happened, my concern, again, is our air base over there and them being a NATO ally. Will the military that's taken over in this new coup support the NATO alliance, support our military base being there? If this movement is about security within Turkey, I would think they would be supportive of our efforts.
Because this is almost the kind of situation, if it develops along these lines, we saw a few years ago in Egypt, there was a democratically elected Islamist government, Muslim Brotherhood-led government.
Foreign policy development. But again, I think what our interests are at stake are that we want to make sure this NATO ally stays an ally and that our air base stays intact.
It's a very, very tense situation. Mr. Chairman, stay with us. There's more. We're watching developments there, also getting new information on the investigation into that horrible terror attack in France.
Where contrast creates harmony. creative Korea.
It's hard to think about, but every year, millions of children are bought and sold. They are forced into prostitution or made to work at grueling, dangerous. I'm Angie Harmon, and I believe the number of children suffering this way should be 0. 5.5 million children are victims of forced labor and child trafficking all over the world. Their childhoods are being stolen. They work in exploitive, dangerous jobs, sell their bodies, miss out on an education, and live in servitude. To help these children, we must see them. Join us and learn how you can help end child trafficking. Believe in 0 exploited children, 0 abused.
Welcome, Wynton Marsalis. What an entrance. Foreign Minister, welcome to the programme.
Thank you. A lot of the progress in food is about honesty or the lack of it.
Is that what is going to keep America safe? How do you best protect people in an era where people are moving around all the time? What drew you to want to portray this character in this film?
The character is really kind of the essential great journalist.
Do you think America is leading enough in the solution to the end of the war in Syria?
No country, including Saudi Arabia, can play a big enough role.
I feel a huge amount of challenge and pain about the situation that we've experienced.